In the age of our ancestors, beyond the many hills were the beautiful lands of the Igbo people, what is now Nigeria. There on a plain was a thriving village, led by the wise and just Chief Akubata. The lands of the Igbo people was truly a wonder to behold. The hills were lush and verdant, dotted with wildflowers and tall trees that reached towards the sky. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming flowers, and the sounds of chirping birds filled the ears of all who journeyed through this idyllic landscape. The Igbo people themselves lived in harmony with nature, drawing from the abundant resources of their land to sustain their communities. Their society was just as beautiful as the hills that surrounded them. The Igbo lived in close-knit communities, where neighbors were treated as family and everyone took care of one another. The people were known for their hospitality, kindness, and generosity, and there was a sense of shared responsibility for the well-being of the community as a whole. The Igbo lived in peace and harmony with their neighbors, including the Osoro village clan. However, tensions started to rise as the Osoro clan grew envious of the prosperity of the Igbo village. One night, the Osoro clan attacked the Igbo in a vicious and brutal raid. Chief Akubata tried his best to save his people, but many were captured and sold into slavery. The Igbo, along with other West African captives, were packed into a dilapidated and overcrowded slave ship, the Wanderer, to be transported across the Atlantic to America. It was a perilous journey across the vast, unforgiving sea, one that would test the very limits of human endurance. For the slaves aboard the ship, it was a nightmare that would haunt them for the rest of their days. Diseases ravaged the cramped quarters of the ship, spreading quickly and claiming lives with ruthless efficiency. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the groans of the sick and dying echoed through the night. As for their bodily functions, the slaves had no choice but to relieve themselves where they stood, as there were no proper facilities on board. The fetid smell of urine and feces mingled with the sickly sweet scent of the sea, and it was all they could do to keep their spirits from breaking. Seasickness was a constant companion, with many of the slaves heaving and retching over the sides of the ship. The rolling waves and pitch-black nights were enough to make even the strongest among them wish for a swift and merciful death. Food was scarce, and what little there was consisted of stale horse leather and brackish water. Many of the slaves fell ill from malnutrition, and those who survived had to fight tooth and nail for every scrap. But even in the darkest of times, there were glimmers of hope. Among the slaves were two brothers, Chindu and Abana, who clung to each other for strength and support. Together, they weathered the storms and fought off the despair that threatened to overwhelm them. In the face of such adversity, the brothers held fast to their Igbo traditions and sayings. A family tie is like a thread that ties a bundle of sticks together, Chindu would say, reminding them that their bond as brothers was unbreakable. Tired and sickly Abana, for his part, would tell them that
if you want to go fast, go low. If you want to go far, go together.
He kept reminding them that their strength lay in their unity. Such was the nature of a slave's journey. On his part, Chief Akubata sang warm words of the cold world they were in. He said that the river water knew it all. He sang the river song, which spoke of the water spirit who brought them to this world, and would one day take them home. When the Wanderer arrived in Savannah, Georgia in May 1803, the West African captives aboard the ship were filled with a mixture of fear, despair, and hope. The experience of being forcibly taken from their homes and sold into slavery had been a traumatic one, and they were now arriving in a foreign land where they knew they would face even greater hardships. The conditions aboard the ship had been unbearable, with disease, starvation, and death a constant presence. It seemed to be the arrival to Hades. Chief Akubata stood on the deck of the Wanderer, surveying the group of weary and battered slaves that surrounded him. He knew that their journey had been a hard one, filled with hardships and suffering that no human being should ever have to endure. But he also saw the strength and resilience of his people, and he knew that they still had the power to fight back against their oppressors. In a powerful speech, he rallied his fellow slaves, reclaiming their freedom.
My brothers and sisters, hear me now. We have suffered too long. We have been shackled and beaten. We have been robbed of our dignity and our humanity. But I tell you this, we are not slaves. We are not slaves. We are the descendants of kings and queens, of warriors and scholars. We come from a land of rolling hills and sparkling rivers, of proud traditions and noble customs. We were once free, and we shall be free again. We have a duty to honor our ancestors by seeking the freedom they knew. We may face hardships and trials, but I tell you now, death is preferable to a life of bondage. We must never forget the rolling hills and sparkling rivers of our Igbo lands, nor the just society that we once knew. Let us remember who we are and what we are capable of. Let us reclaim our freedom or die trying. I urge you, my brothers and sisters, to rather drown than be slaves. Remember the river song.
Akubata said that they now were living a life of extremes. As the Wanderer approached the shore of Savannah, Georgia, the Igbo slaves, led by Chief Akubata, made their move. They rose up against their captors, taking control of the ship and driving their oppressors into the water. But as they reached the land, they realized that their struggle was far from over. Men were waiting for them on the shore, ready to force them onto plantations and continue their life of slavery. In the face of this overwhelming odds, Chief Akubata did not waver. He stood tall, singing a song of defiance and urging his fellow slaves to follow him back into the water. He sang of the water spirit, of the river that had brought them to this place and would now carry them home. He called on his people to remember their heritage and to honor their ancestors by refusing to live a life of oppression and servitude. With tears streaming down their faces, the Igbo people stepped back into the water, singing along with their leader. Some were hesitant at first, but as they felt the cool embrace of the water and heard the voices of their fellow slaves, they found the courage to follow Chief Akubata's call. One by one, they walked deeper into the water until they were consumed by the waves and returned to the arms of their ancestors. In that moment, they chose death over slavery, and their spirits were forever free. The story of the Igbo landing at Dunbar Creek on St. Simon's Island is a reminder of the strength, resilience, and courage of the African people. It is a testament to the unbreakable spirit of a people who, in the face of unimaginable horrors, refused to be broken and chose freedom over life. The memory of Chief Akubata and the Igbo people will forever be honored and celebrated as a symbol of hope and liberation. The tragedy of the Igbo people can be seen as a result of the forces of history and circumstance that were beyond their control. The Asoro village was stronger because they had been practicing slavery and had better weapons and armor, giving them a significant advantage over the peace-loving Igbo. This disparity was a reflection of the larger societal forces at play, where the brutal practice of slavery was a prevalent and accepted institution. The Igbo, with their refusal to participate in this vice, found themselves at a disadvantage and their fate was sealed. For many black people, slavery was now a force of nature, a fact of life that they had no power to change or escape. The experience of the Igbo highlights the larger themes of oppression, power, and human suffering that were prevalent in the world of 18th and 19th century. Despite their best efforts to resist, the Igbo were unable to escape the inevitable consequences of a system that was rigged against them from the start. Their story is a reminder of the deep-seated injustices that continue to shape our world, and a call to action for those who strive for a better, more equitable future. Are we black people truly free? Despite the end of colonial rule and the establishment of independent African nations, the question remains as to whether Africans are truly free. The overburden of foreign debt and the weakness in leadership across the continent cast doubt on the level of autonomy and self-determination experienced by African people. Our dependence on international lending institutions and foreign aid, coupled with ineffective and corrupt governance, has led to limited progress in addressing the socio-economic challenges facing our beautiful people. Are we still like the Igbo people, my brothers and sisters?